Hello, everybody. My name is Jamie Devine, and I'm a designer on the user experience team here at Google. And it's my pleasure to introduce Scott Hirsch and John Sapolsky of Management Innovation Group. MIG is a strategy consultancy that specializes helping their clients demystify the changes that are rapidly changing their industries and understand how to compete in a less certain future, excuse me. Their clients include Nokia, British Telecom, the New York Times, Reed Elsevier, Rodale, and many other companies who wish to remain anonymous because they don't want you to know they are afraid of Google. Please help me welcome Scott and John.
Thank you. A little bit of housekeeping first, and then we're going to jump into our presentation. But we wanted everybody to take one of these Post-it notes. I'm going to say this all into the microphone, and then I'm going to walk over to you. Take Post-it notes, and while I'm talking, this is a debate, by the way. So pretend like you're back in high school debating team. And so one of us is going to argue one side of the question, does Google need managers? And the other one is going to argue the other side. And because it's high school debate and it's the forensics team and everybody's really nerdy, we've made sure to make our talk really corny and to have some jokes in it, but there's substance behind the jokes. And I just want to let you know it's okay to laugh. I don't want to have any awkward silences where you guys are looking at each other being like, are they really serious? Yeah, we are serious, but we also have a good sense of humor. And so we wanted to bring that to Google because we know a lot of you guys and we think you guys are really funny and great. But the thing that I wanted you to do before we get started and we jump into character, since we'll be in characters, is I want everybody to take a Post-it note and write, while I'm talking, since I'm arguing that Google does not need managers, I'm taking the default position, write down how you think that's true. Just one thing in one sentence. Anything. It can be anything. While John is making his arguments and he's taking the opposing position, which is Google does need managers, and he'll be talking after me, you're going to do the same thing supporting his arguments. And we're going to actually use some of the commentary that you guys give us in the process of doing our rebuttals. So let me just jump around really fast and hand some of these out. Now I have to get into character. So if you'll stand up next to me for one moment so that we can say our one line that we have to say together to establish the character that we're in. Hit it.
Don't you start?
I think you start.
Okay. I'm a Mac.
And I'm a PC. Okay. So that should establish the point of view that I'm going to be taking, and I'm going to be stating things that are really obvious but maybe a little painful. In character now. I'm coming into character. Okay. Okay. So, sorry, I have to adjust my notes. Okay, so I'm a PC, and I'm going to be arguing why Google does not need managers. That Google is fine just the way it is. And we all are familiar, since we're all fans of popular culture, familiar with this image from perhaps one of the best movies ever made about office culture. And the argument that I think that they would be telling you right now in this image is you can sum up the reason why Google does not need managers with 3 simple letters. Does anybody know what they are? The first one's T. Got the answer right now. You win a prize, sir. The prize is free lunch at the Google cafeteria. 3 simple letters, TPS reports. The bane of everyone in Office Space's existence. So why are TPS reports so bad? I'm going to have very few words in this presentation. This is one of the few wordy slides, so forgive me. The really simple argument is that process gets in the way of innovation. And how can you be innovating if you're constantly having to fill out reports and go through all this unnecessary process and procedure in order to do what you really wanted to do to begin with, which is design really interesting, cool products and work with other really cool, creative people. Second, hiring smart people and peer accountability work better than bosses. So this is really obvious in a culture like this, right? Isn't everybody really happy that peer accountability and smart coworkers make working here really fun and interesting. Third, Darwin, I'm going to be hitting on all these points in my talk. I'm establishing the conceptual frame for you guys. Darwin figured out how to prioritize more than 100 years ago. We've got things like Darwinian natural selection. So, the wisdom of the crowds is much better at figuring out what things we should develop than any strategy consultant from McKinsey or any MBA analytic framework from business school might be able to help you figure out how to do. So if you've got smart people and you've got peer review, you should be able to figure out what the right products to do are. Fourth, project-based self-organization eliminates organizational friction. And I've got some really good examples I'm maybe using from this later on. And the final reason why process and procedure and TPS reports are unnecessary is because there are better incentives to get to a launch than actually having a Gantt chart of how to get to the launch in front of you. So first, I want to talk a little bit about process impeding innovation. Has anybody seen a chart like this at any time in their careers? I'm getting a lot of nods. I found this chart really kind of interesting because I downloaded it off of a website about software development. And actually, it seems like they've squeezed an awful lot of stuff into week 1 and week 2. You probably can't read the words, but I was just really shocked. It just seemed really aspirational to me. And wouldn't you much rather than going through a requirements gathering process at the beginning of a project like this, sit down and actually start innovating and iterating? And I think that's really what Google has learned that other companies have not learned, and that other companies are really jealous of Google for, which is how do you create an environment of empowerment where people don't have to be beholden to the process chart. They don't have to be beholden to the Gantt chart. And let's talk about managers for a second. A manager's job, even at the lowest level, is to figure out how to create charts like this and how to make sure that they stand behind you while you're doing your work and figure out how to make you hit that next piece of the Gantt chart on time. And that takes a lot of time. And so if we free up that time from those managers from having to do that, then it gives a lot of time for other more interesting and innovative things. And I think finally, the point I wanted to make about this chart is that these charts are these charts are lies. Basically, you think that the purpose of this chart is to actually figure out how to allocate resources to projects to get things delivered on time. But in reality, there's fudge built into every single time somebody does a chart like this, there's fudge built into it. And so why do all that fudging? Why not just hit the ground running and innovate and iterate, as I said earlier? And take all the wasted time out of the system. And if you take the wasted time out of the system, then workers get more time for being delicious. This is my first cultural reference. I'm actually very proud of this one. I tried to work a lot of pop cultural references into my talk because I hear that's what all you hip, cool kids are doing nowadays. Another free lunch for anyone at the Google cafeteria today if they know where this reference is from. No one knows? It's really obscure, so I'm really proud of it. It's a spin-off fake television show from a fake reality TV show that you know it's fake because it's animated, and it's impossible to have an animated reality TV show called Drawn Together, which used to come on Comedy Central. And that's Judge Fudge. He's really into being delicious. So, okay, my next big point, and I think everybody in this room knows this one and has had it drilled into their head a million times, and it's in every single article that you read about Google. And that is part of what makes the magic of Google work and why the hierarchy can be flatter is because you hire smart people. And so I've actually formulated this equation that I'm actually going to be, it's patent pending, but I'll let you know what some of the variables are because I have to let you know how it works a little bit. But I call it the Hirsch-Rank equation, and mu is your high school GPA, and sigma is the number of tech-related news feeds that you read each day. And if you plug everything into this equation about any individual, you automatically know how successful they're going to be at Google. And if you you can later use modifications of this equation to actually figure out how to assign them a score of between 0 and 1 on their performance review, so that it can go into the promotion committee and people can get promoted. I thought that was going to get more chuckles. You guys know I'm being snarky, right? I'm the PC. I'm supposed to be saying things that are really obvious. in a really dumb way. Okay, and indoctrinating them early. Everybody knows the culture at Google is really, really thick. You can cut it with a knife. That indoctrination serves a purpose. And that purpose is everybody's in alignment around the same goals, values, beliefs. Everybody has the same performance incentives. Everybody has the same high-level strategic direction that gives you the freedom not to have to be given specific direction by a direct manager. I see the Mac is taking notes. I'm getting really worried. I'm worried about the rebuttal because he was actually the captain of his high school debating team. There's tons of things in the indoctrination process that you know much better than I do. But I like to think of it a little bit like the Hypnotoad from Futurama. And the Hypnotoad, for those of you who don't know, has the longest running television series in the year 3000. It's been on for 527 years. Another role of management is actually to eliminate friction. And I think this is probably the one that Google has the most need for managers to be able to do. Because if you're going to create a culture of empowerment, you need to be able to butter up the sticky parts of the organization and allow people to actually work on, to remove the roadblocks that are getting them in the way of delivering and working on the things that they want to work on and that they need to work on. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about prioritization. I know my Darwinian analogy is not exactly right because Darwinian evolution has a lot to do with random occurrences, and natural selection filters out the random occurrences to best suit individual species to their environment. But there's parts of the Darwinian analogy that I really like in application to product development processes at companies like Google. And the clients that we work with are incredibly jealous of this, incredibly jealous, because they feel like for them to make a course correction at any point once they've defined a strategic vision for a series of products, they're lagging by a year sometimes, at best 6 months. And if you're in an environment where projects are allowed to emerge and get traction and get energy around them, and then later maybe be killed off or maybe like subside a little bit, go off to the back burner for a little while, or they're allowed to blossom and they hit launch, that's just a much faster, more iterative way to be able to do product development. And especially in the telecom industry, everybody that we have worked with has been incredibly jealous of this, and they have no idea why they can't do it. And I think the reason they can't do it is because of the reasons that I've already mentioned in this talk, which is the culture. The culture is an absolutely important piece of how to make processes like these work. Okay, so I wanted to talk, I'm moving back into snarky mode so you guys can laugh again. I wanted to talk about evolution. And so when you have really smart people working on really interesting projects, I mean, of course, sometimes projects are just the ones that are going to hit launch are going to be the ones that are absolutely the best, right? You know, the ones that are really going to make a splash in the environment, in the world, and consumers are going to love them, and they're just going to be absolutely embraced by the media. You know, things like, oh, okay, I put the wrong slide. I'm sorry. I meant to put that one. You know, that same level of energy and embracing of new and interesting ideas and embracing new ways and modes of working into your culture also apply to mergers and acquisitions. I think Google, that's another reason that Google has been actually really good in not needing managers, because it's been very strategic in the types of companies that it's acquired and actually been willing to kill products and projects or have them subside, let's say, if they haven't met the expectations. By the way, I watched this talk yesterday. If nobody's seen it, I found it really, really interesting. It's Eric Schmidt talking at Gary Hamel's Management Innovation Lab. And he doesn't mention technology hardly at all anytime in the talk. All he's talking about is culture, people, and processes. And he actually hints at some of the things that he thinks might be major roadblocks for Google coming up in the near future. I thought it was super interesting, so if you haven't seen it, I'd highly recommend it. Okay, so in the next slide, I'm going to talk about self-organization. Oh, I have 5 minutes, thank you. I'm going to talk about self-organization, because self-organization is really key to operating an organization that doesn't need managers. Because managers are there to impose organization. And if you don't want to have managers, there needs to be a method for self-organization. And all of the things that I've mentioned so far have been important factors in self-organization. And this next slide, I think, is the strongest empirical case for the irrelevancy of managers. And I think it's self-explanatory. Okay, so self-organization is behind us. For those of you who don't know, that was the Borg from Star Trek, which are the collective, and they all have the same brain, and they all do the same things. Just being a little snarky, sorry. Okay, so next I want to talk about incentives to launch, because none of this would be of any use at all. It would all be very academic unless we actually had incentives to launch. And I think the concept of smart people working on anything that they want has been highly romanticized outside of Google. And the slack that it gives in the product development process that our clients are really jealous of, that I talked about earlier in my talk, I think would not be possible if there weren't the right incentives in place. And Google is definitely a company that rewards its employees very generously, especially if they're able to launch and deliver on products. Oh wait, okay, that's actually not. I must have been using Ask Jeeves. That's not the certificate I meant to put up there. I meant to put this one up there, which actually doesn't exist because I don't think Google issues stock certificates. But I made this one by pasting the Google logo over the Apple logo. So if it's a shared core belief, again, part of the culture, that launch is one of the most important things that the company can do to better serve its customers. I've got 3 minutes, thank you. Then nothing is academic anymore, right? Because everybody is moving towards a shared goal and a shared objective. I wanted to put on my MBA hat for a second and pull out some classic definitions of management that I think this talk has I've already done a pretty good job of challenging, because I think what my opponent is going to try to do is he's going to try to tell you why Google does need managers, and I think he's going to try to use classical arguments. I actually haven't seen his presentation, so I don't know. And so, one, the derivation of the word management means to lead by the hand. But the things that you learn when you read business books and in business school is like, managers are there to allocate scarce resources, to divisionalize complexity, set strategic vision, make course corrections, direct, coach, mentor, staff, etc. And I think, of course, there's no need to divisionalize or manage complexity when you're the Borg. And allocation of scarce resources. The scarce resource in Google is not what it is in most companies. In most companies, it's people, meaning talent, and money. And that's not the case here. So there's a whole different system for allocating scarce resources that just doesn't apply in most working environments, and I think makes it possible for Google not to need managers. So what is the role of the manager? I think I'm going to try to preempt an argument that I think my worthy adversary might try to make, which is to say that of course Google needs managers. All companies need managers. And I would like to preempt by agreeing with that. But I think the role of the manager in a culture like this is more of a facilitator or a lubricant or a coach or even a therapist. And I wanted to go back to that derivation really quickly, because to lead by the hand, I think, implies a very paternalistic relationship between manager and employee. And that relationship doesn't need to exist when you're in a culture such as this one, where you have a group of equals, where everybody's intelligence is equally valid and everybody can debate their point based on their beliefs, the facts, and its merits. So, and also, you can't really be paternalistic at Google because there's no, just look around, there's no parents here. So I'd like to think of leading by the hand as more of this image, which is, the parents spinning the kid around, and and not necessarily to make the kid dizzy and throw up, but to make the kid feel really joyful and excited to be alive and to be doing the things that they're doing. So in conclusion, why Google does not need managers. I can actually sum this up in one very simple image. Why mess with perfection? Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to offer the counter argument.
While John is giving his counter argument, I'm going to collect any comments that you guys wrote down supporting my thesis.
And so I'm going to pass this out and ask you guys to write down your thoughts on why Google does need managers. Sorry, I'll back it up there. That's actually how to survive an encounter with a nuclear explosion. Okay, so I'm going to argue the counterpoint, why Google does need managers. And I'm going to specifically try to convince you of why some of the prevailing wisdom and some of the arguments that my colleague just laid out are actually short-sighted or unsophisticated. So my colleague argued that, in this new world, we have emergent coordination, that we have Darwinian selection, that we don't need managers to control that. It's like how hands clapping in an audience naturally kind of come into sync with each other, that there's feedback mechanisms that help everybody get aligned. And that's the way that Google works, because we hire smart people, we have common vision, we have common priorities, we have common values, and we just tend to align emergently. Or maybe the model is something like looking at a flock of crows and how those tend to get signals from each other, disperse, come back together, pick up on signals, move, and acting out of individual self-interest, actually come to good collective decisions. So those things I would say are true. I believe in those too. But Google's actually, the people who work at Google are not crows, right? In fact, they're people. And people don't behave because of the intelligence that we have in the same way that less intelligent animals act. People don't behave in terms of simple tasks like hands clapping in an audience because we have systems that try to override emergent group behavior and make our own decisions, because we've all come up being smart people, understanding that people value our opinion, people value our decision, and we have confidence in our own decisions. And so I'm going to trust the thing that's made me successful throughout my life, which is being really intelligent, to come to my own decisions rather than just kind of be held mercy to the decision of the flock and react to that very, very rapidly. So people, I'd say, are actually a different animal. So then what's the model for managing a group of people? Well, it's been pretty well documented what the model for Google was. Larry and Sergey have both said, well, we were at Stanford studying software engineering, and we designed a company that we thought would work really well based on what we knew, which was academia. So that's our model. And the academic model, I think you could argue really well, works for lots of situations, but has some drawbacks as well. If the model is going to be academia, basically means hire really, really smart people and let them do what they want. That's what the tenure system is about, right? Okay, so publish or perish. We're going to follow the academic model. That means launch or you're out. So get to it, Noogler. But I think there's a problem with this, and that's that it fails to take into consideration that resources actually are becoming more scarce. So my colleague argued that Google doesn't need managers because, unlike most companies, we don't have scarce resources of talented people. Well, in fact, that might have been true when you had 100 people, 1,000 people, maybe 2,000 people. But with 20,000 people, I think you have to ask how many of the best and brightest really are out there in the world. And if you look to that academic model, which was kind of driving the founding of the company, you look at faculties at some of the best universities in the world, like Stanford or MIT or Chicago or Berkeley. Stanford and Harvard have maybe 2,000 faculty members. MIT has maybe 1,000 faculty members. Chicago has maybe 2,000 faculty members. Getting that up to 20,000 people would be incredibly difficult to find people who really continue to live up to those standards of academic excellence, of intelligence, of high performance that you really come to demand. So how do you maintain those standards and continue to get high performance as a company if you're just relying on trying to go out and get the best people in the world? If you get to a company of 30,000, 40,000, or 50,000, is that really going to be realistic? I would argue not. So what do you do? Well, you could make your own people or come up with ideas and have sock puppets. Some companies sustain themselves pretty well under that model for a little while, but eventually crashed. We don't want that to happen to Google, of course. So to me, the question, though, is Eric Schmidt says, every company says that people are the most important asset. But at Google, people really are the most important asset. OK, fine. Let's accept that on face value. The question is, if that's your asset, how do you get that asset to perform for you when the market's up and when the market's down? If you now have a scarce resource of people that are assets, really good financial managers tend to get good returns regardless of the market environment, whether I'm investing in asset classes that may not be optimal asset classes, or I'm investing in really good stocks. It's about my ability to select, to find value, et cetera. So I think if Google's employees are its greatest asset, then managers have a role to play there in terms of managing that asset in the way that any asset manager has a role to play in figuring out what are the right kinds of assets to get the most kind of value right now. And that doesn't mean that you necessarily have to hire the best and brightest only. It means that you add value as a manager through your wisdom, through your process, through your methods for putting asset classes together, mitigating risk, et cetera. I think the big problem is that when people say management and Google needs managers, we're all kind of locked into a traditional view of what management is that comes from, in very significant part, a guy named Frederick Taylor, who invented scientific management. Now, this had a lot of appeal because it took it from a very kind of crafty thing to almost a more algorithm-based way of doing management. I think there's some parts of that that folks in Google would value, in fact, which was to systematize and try to optimize performance from individual people. But I think today, Taylor's model falls down in an important way, which is that it's task-oriented. It's about trying to optimize the tasks that employees do, and as a manager being sort of the font of knowledge about how you do that. And I think that's wrong. What that actually leads to is control systems and what I would call a pseudoscience. It's just about aggregating control for the enlightened management class, right? And making everybody else subservient to that. I don't think that's really the right way to think about it, though. I think the right way to think about how managers add value is to think about how can I find people and put teams together as my asset that are going to really be undiscovered by the rest of the market. I can look for arbitrage opportunities. I can look for different theories. I can develop smarter ways, actually be inventive and creative about management rather than sort of rely on the old models that will help us get superior performance. It's not about me just bossing people around. So if you look at great asset managers, somebody like Warren Buffett absolutely believes in that. Investing for the long term, finding undervalued securities to invest in. And one of the ways you discover what's a good investment to make is all based on people's motivation. So he says that what he tries to understand is the company that I'm investing in run by people who get out of bed in the morning because they love the business? So there's passion there. It's not necessarily about raw talent or raw intelligence. And Warren Buffett's been incredibly successful by taking often contrarian views about where does the source of value in his assets come from. I think Google has an opportunity to be inventive about managers in developing new ideas about how to maximize the value of people as an asset. Those things aren't out there. Those are opportunities to be exploited, just like Warren Buffett did by coming up with his own theories on what to buy and invest in. I think there's lots of other good models for this, too. A lot of you probably know Moneyball. This is Billy Beane, who's the general manager of the Oakland A's. And he basically has seen himself as an arbitrageur as well. So he says, like Google perhaps, that in a market where people are competing for scarce assets for the Oakland A's, its players, we can't get enough really good players because there just aren't that many out there in the world, just like there aren't that many great software engineers out there in the world. There's always going to be inefficiency in that. So what he's trying to do is find a way to see into dark corners, to turn over stones that haven't been turned over before, and to figure out who are the great players that people are missing because they don't fit the standard criteria, maybe they didn't have the best pedigree, but there's some real value that we can get. And I think this is a real underexploited way to look at managers for Google, where there's an opportunity, again, to be very inventive about it. Because, of course, the Yankees don't always win. The Yankee approach, which I would say has been the Google approach so far, is just be willing to pay for the best talent, go out and acquire the best talent. But that best talent, just like certain asset classes, don't always perform equally. So, for me, the question is, if you're going to be a manager at Google, can you win with different teams and different people over many years? Anybody recognize those folks? Yeah, that's a nod to my hometown, the Motor City, Detroit Red Wings coach, Scotty Bowman, and new coach Mike Babcock. They just won the Stanley Cup last week. Scotty Bowman won 9 Stanley Cups between 1974, I think, with the Montreal Canadiens, and 2002 with the Red Wings, and did it with probably at least 6 teams that were incredibly different from one another. And so what is it that a coach can do to add value and consistently produce winners without necessarily having the best people on his teams? That's the opportunity for Google to use managers. Now, of course, you can't just hire anybody, right? You probably should have an IQ that's at least maybe 1 standard deviation from the mean. But my point here is that management can be very creative. Okay, maybe not in the mold of Enron. But I think the thing to pay attention to is the fact that just like it's very googly to run lots of experiments with different kinds of products out there in the marketplace, I think Google right now is missing a big opportunity by not having lots of managers run small experiments around creating the future of management. So you have pretty standardized, in a Taylor way, ways of selecting who your hires are. That's very, very centralized. You have very, very standardized ways of evaluating people's compensation. If you're a designer, maybe that is harder in some contexts for you to kind of prove how you've added value or impacted Google than if you're an engineer, because you're less in control of the levers that actually get products to launch. So by standardizing that, you're taking away lots of ripe opportunity to be very internet-y, to let people invent on their own new ways of making decisions, new ways of creating hiring practices, new ways of allocating resources, new ways of getting performance out of people. And what happens when it's very highly centralized or sort of pushed from a single place is you get positive feedback loops. Now, positive feedback loops aren't positive. They're actually negative. They're things that cause traffic jams. They're things that cause microphone interference, where small actions tend to accrete and be amplified throughout the system. And so what that means is when you make certain hires, we tend to hire people who are like us, right? And so if those little inefficiencies come in terms of how we get hired, and that ripples throughout this very, very common hiring practice, and we're not allowed to experiment with divergent ways of selecting people, then that's just going to turn into a positive feedback loop. It's going to create echo chambers. And the real danger is that you start breeding a monoculture. Monocultures are problems, especially when you have a culture as thick as Google's, because while in certain environments, those cultures are very, very well adapted to the environment, when that environment shifts, and it's a single swarm of locusts that comes and takes out the whole field, you have no resiliency there. So you need to do some more experimentation. What that also means, I think, is that you start to get fairly arbitrary ways of distinguishing people that can, at worst, turn into a popularity contest. That's not necessarily based on real contribution, but that's based on fitting in to the culture, seeming googly. And I think, again, managers have an opportunity to not standardize that stuff, not introduce common practices, but introduce divergent practices, introduce more diversity in terms of the way that people are evaluated, compensated, motivated, et cetera. So if you're a manager at Google and you're trying to think about, again, people are our greatest asset here, how do you get performance out of that asset? Well, I think the secret is people work for people. We all know this. This is a platitude in business, that people work for people. Orchestra conductors are a common metaphor. This happens to be Benjamin Zander, who's the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic. He gets to select from some of the best musicians in the world. And he says, why do my musicians play better for me than they play on their own or that they might play for another symphony? I'll tell you why. It's because I get them to BTFI. Anyone know what BTFI is? It's beyond the fuck it. It's getting people to feel motivated to really kind of push past their fear, push past the insecurities, push past the politics, and really get more out of themselves than you think you could. Sorry if swearing on YouTube is not allowed, by the way. So what are some other examples of ways that you could introduce some management innovations here, or think creatively about it? I think there's lots of models out there in the world. We've seen them in our client companies. We've tried to help them invent them. Whole Foods, a client of ours, is a company that's definitely experimented with having a premium on manager and managerial competence, but not standardizing at all. So Whole Foods does some things in the market that, in the industry that are very, very different. Most people believe in the grocery business, the way you make money is by standardizing as much as you can and rigidly controlling your supply chain so that you get leverage over over the people that you buy from as your distribution channel. So that means your stores tend to be the same, the things that you carry tend to be the same. At Whole Foods, actually, the stores themselves decide how they want to be designed, what the user experience is going to be in their individual store, how people are going to be, which people are going to be on teams. So when you get hired provisionally for 90 days. In order to stay on, you have to get a unanimous vote of everybody on your team. Even if you just want to be, say, working in the produce aisle, as a produce stocker, you have to kind of win the confidence of everybody on the produce team, and anybody can veto that. But as a result, they get an opportunity to introduce lots and lots of experiments about how they're going to build these models. So if they go into Oakland in a more industrial neighborhood, they might decide, we're going to use this as a chance to experiment with the loft-like Whole Foods experience. And then in Houston, when they buy out an old spa and decide to build their store there, it's an opportunity for them to experiment with the spa-like experience of Whole Foods. And these are things that then the manager's job is to take that from individualized, localized capabilities and turn them into institutional capabilities or institutional learning. And again, I think that's a way that you can be really, really inventive. So in conclusion, I would say that Google needs management, but management innovators, not standard managers. You need managers who are going to commit to solving big problems, who are going to hone the spirit of Google to say, we're not going to work on things that don't move the needle, that don't impact a lot of people. We're going to work on inventing management practices that solve some really crappy trade-offs that you typically have to make in business. And because management is both an art and a science, the way that art and science progresses is by doing experiments. And you have to work hard on those experiments, and you have to work, just like in the university, sometimes for years on a single problem to be able to solve it. So you need to open up room for managers to be able to work on those big problems for a long time. With that, there's room for, I think, both theoretical approaches and experimental approaches to creating new management practices. And in the end, it comes down to challenging conventional wisdom, arbitraging new value, thinking like a Warren Buffett, and saying, as a manager at Google, I'm going to look for ways that I can find people, or I can find more to get people out of I can find more ways to get value out of the people I already have that other people don't see, that other people aren't able to jump on, and as a result, I'm going to outperform other companies. That's my argument. Scott's going to have 3 minutes to rebut me, and then I'm going to have a rebuttal from there.
Actually, we want to leave enough time for some conversation with the audience, so I'm just going to really quickly do a rebuttal based on some information that I got from the audience. But first, I have to jump back into character so I can say my favorite Simpsons line ever, which is, "You made me get off my stool for this." It's a comic book guy. So my opponent actually tried to argue that there's financial reasons why Google needs managers as a company grows and scales, that it actually needs layers of management in order to be able to continue to scale effectively and actually be able to manage its people as an asset. Well, I fundamentally agree with his premise, and I think it actually aligns with one of my points, which is really about a new role for managers, a more googly interpretation of the role of managers as opposed to a traditional classical role of managers. I completely agree with the person in the audience who wrote it very clearly on this one Post-it note. Why we don't need managers, $170 billion market cap without them. Pretty much sums it up as far as I'm concerned. Let's see, another point I just wanted to call out really quickly was that managers are simply filling the role of risk mitigation. We can afford risk and we need risk. And I think that also aligns really closely to the points that I was making in my talk. And if I can step out of my fake debate, I think it really closely aligns to the points that my opponent was making as well, which is that it's not the traditional role of management that we're really looking at here as being the opportunity for Google. Yes, risk management. What's the real word for risk management? It's CYA. Cover your ass, and that means limiting the flow of information between the people below you and the people above you. Google has done something entirely different, which is about transparency of information from the top to the bottom, as far as I know. I mean, I've never worked in the culture, but that's everybody I've talked to has described that. And that really is unique. And those of you who've worked in other companies, I'm sure, can agree with that, or might agree with that. Are you ready to do your rebuttal, John? Because I want to make sure that we have time to like engage in a conversation. So John's going to do his rebuttal now.
Okay. So 2 quick points about that. One, you say risk mitigation is really about CYA. I say that's not true. Risk mitigation is about being resilient. It's about the same kind of thing as why we don't want to have a single company rule the whole internet, because we don't want that much vulnerability in the system. We want lots of individual bloggers, lots of individual people creating new methods and creating new ways of working, in that collectively that makes the system much less risk prone. Likewise, managers creating experiments about different ways to manage people mitigates the risk of a monoculture, of a big environmental change where the current culture, which is so strong, is maladapted for, brings down the entire company, the entire set of really, really, really smart people. Second thing is reading from one of these questions. I'm not sure who wrote it. You say that Google will benefit from inventive managers. What about the uninventive, standard, inflexible managers that we have today? I don't know anything about that, but...
And I want to read this one before John finishes. You act like we don't have managers at Google today. You assert that our bonus system works, that we have autonomy to work on projects of our choosing, that people and money aren't scarce. You are so wrong. In our defense, I mean, we had to create an artificial construct within which to have debate. I'm not debating or denying that that might be the case. But anyway, go on.
So I guess the thing I would say about that is I wouldn't necessarily call those people artful or highly talented managers. And I wouldn't say for sure that they're management innovators if it's all about, quote, uninventive, standard, and inflexible managers. So what I would say is that it's a big blind spot for Google, precisely because Google hasn't embraced the idea that managers can create value, that we need managers, that managers have something unique to contribute. Thanks. We're going to take some questions from you guys now. If you want to declare one of us the winner, especially me, happy to hear that.
No.
Otherwise, we'll take your questions if you have any.
I think we have a mic now, so I can, if anybody has a question. Yes.
Thanks. So what's your definition of a manager? Is that someone that's formally given the manager title?
Generally, yes, although I don't think that only people who've formally been given the title can be skillful at management. I think a manager is somebody who plays a certain function in the company, which is about inventing new ways to allocate resources, to get value out of the assets that you have in the company, to figure out strategy, to align people, and to get people to perform really, really well.
So what if I was to submit to you that Google has empowered individuals to take that role of innovation and making decisions?
I would say that's good, and you should do more of it, and you should really make room for those people to challenge conventional wisdom, bring in some people maybe that they want to hire that, say, top management wouldn't approve of.
So would that be a counter to having more managers, maybe less managers and more of these kinds of people?
Well, I'm not saying, I'll let you address this, sorry, Scott. I'm not saying that Google needs more managers. I'm just saying Google needs, definitely needs talented people in the role of manager.
I wasn't kidding when John and I didn't compare notes before this talk. We actually did it in the car on the way here. But I think that's the common ground in both, even though, like, you know, I was put in the straw man position, right? You know, so I was put in the position to argue that Google doesn't need managers, based on an assumption that it doesn't currently have managers, you know? So like, I was sort of in the straw man role. John had the opportunity to be a little bit more provocative in redefining the way that Google could have managers in a more googly way. But I think the common ground in our—
Mac.
Because he's a Mac, exactly, and I'm a PC. But I think the common ground in both of our talks, and just because John and I have worked together forever, we're in really close alignment around this, and that is that, you know, this like artificial like archetype that we create in our head of what a manager is does not have to exist. I mean, there's plenty of opportunity for innovating in that space, as well as in technology, and as well as in online products.
Thanks. So how would you say, or how would you describe an innovative manager working within a thick culture and against certain kinds of indoctrination?
Wow. I mean, that's a super good question, and it's really hard to answer without, having been exposed to the culture more than John or I have. But, I'll just tell you, just from things that I hear from people that I know who work here, and that is that, and people wrote that in my cards, actually, process is a bad word. You can't use the word, people are allergic to process. And I think sometimes the idea of process smears onto the idea of management. Whereas in the work that John and I do with our clients, we view our role as facilitative leaders. We view ourselves as facilitators first and foremost. We don't impose. We're one of those strategy consulting firms that does not impose an existing framework or an existing process. It's very co-created between us and our clients. And our clients have told us they really appreciate that about us. And I think if I were in the role of creating a managerial discipline at Google, I would start first with that. And I've actually heard managers at Google talk about that. In Mags Hanley Smith, is that her name? Just spoke at MX about this, Adaptive Paths MX conference just about a month ago that I also spoke at, so I got to hear her talk.
I guess I would just add to that I think it's about making a commitment to make room for managers on the front lines to really be empowered to kind of pull levers in different ways. The levers meaning how you hire people, how you configure people. It's kind of looking at what your portfolio management approach is going to be, to go back to that kind of asset management metaphor. I think you have to figure out, are we going to be value investors, or are we going to be growth investors? Are we going to be people who try to time the market, or are we going to be putting in for the long term? And I think it's hard to answer that in absence of doing some real experiments. And so you need people, you need to empower people on the front lines to make those calls on their own, to test stuff out, to have some kind of locally suboptimal configurations, but that adds more value for the whole.
Do you think it's likely that it's possible to do successful experiments with management techniques in a company that up until recently has been doubling in size every 12 to 18 months?
Can I answer really fast? I just think you can, yes. You just have to be cognizant of it the same way that you're cognizant of the experiments that you run in products and technology infrastructure. So that's my view on that.
I would say it's probably easiest to do that in a company that's really, really seriously threatened. I would say it's second easiest to do that in a company that has 97% of its revenue come from a fairly limited set of products and technologies that give it enormous growth rates because the industry is growing really well and gives you a cushion against failing a lot.
Yeah.
So I would say, yeah, absolutely at Google. I think there's room to do that.
And I want to add something else. And I think I speak for John, I'm not advocating at all if I choose John's position, which is that Google should experiment with management, which I do agree with, even though I'm a PC. I do not advocate at all that this would be, the way that it would be visualized to employees is a reorg. I'm not talking about hierarchy or structure or anything like that. It's really about running experiments and how teams work together and how to facilitate and lubricate and lead those self-managing teams so that they can become even more empowered. Any other question? I think we might be just about out of time.
Yeah, can we do a quick poll? If you don't mind being public about this, just kind of show of hands who buys the argument that Google's fine as it is and doesn't need managers? 1, 2, 3. Okay, and who buys the contrary argument that Google does need managers?
Oh my God, I lost.
Sorry, PC. Keep trying. Okay.
Just like in the commercials.
Thanks. So a lot of fun talking with you guys, and we'll be around for a little bit if anyone has additional questions. But thanks a lot for the opportunity. It was fun.
Thank you.